Hi, everybody. Welcome to this afternoon's webinar on DeliverPoint. I'm Brett Lonsdale from Lightning Tools, and just want to first of all welcome you to the webinar, and hope that this is going to be very beneficial for you and your organization. First thing I wanted to do is just go through a quick introduction as to who I am, who Lightning Tools is. I'll keep that quite brief so that we can get as much covered as we possibly can of a live demonstration of DeliverPoint. Both from the product as it is today, and then also some of the new features that we're going to be rolling out within the next 24 hours, actually. So, yeah, first of all, just give the introduction. So, Lightning Tools, if you're not aware of us, we're a company based in the UK. We're 17 years in business. We created the company back in 2007 in order to address some of the different challenges that people face when they're using Microsoft SharePoint to do things in bulk mostly. So permissions management obviously is one of those things. So we're going to have a look at how DeliverPoint can, of course, help us today. But we have other products in our portfolio, such as content aggregation, discussion boards. We also have list form design tools. We have some automation and also discussion boards as well, forming our portfolio. We are a ISO certified company in terms of quality. That's the ISO 9001 certification, and also information management security, and that's our ISO 27001 certification. And we also have been working over the past 17 years as a Microsoft partner as well, and continue to do so. So what we're going to do first of all is just have a quick intro as to some of the different challenges that people face when using Microsoft SharePoint when dealing with permissions, and we're going to look at that from the perspective of somebody that is a site owner. So a user may have created a site and therefore the owner of that site, and has that responsibility of reporting and managing the permissions within inside the site or sites that they own. And likewise, that can be extended to Microsoft Teams and OneDrive as well. And we're going to have a look at also how we can identify some of those different challenges that people face when they're trying to manage permissions, maybe across different sites and different site collections. So more of a sort of governance perspective on looking at permissions. So we'll explore some of those challenges first so that you can appreciate what DeliverPoint has to offer. So we'll get into then, after demonstrating some of the different challenges, we'll explore DeliverPoint, see how that can help both the site owner, the Teams owner, and also SharePoint administrators or site collection administrators. And most of that is going to be done through a live demonstration. So I'll show you the challenges and then how we can resolve those using DeliverPoint. So we should have enough time to cover the entirety of DeliverPoint within this call, and then we're also going to get into some of the new features. There's 3 key features, so keep your eye out. You may see them during the demonstration, but yeah, we'll have a look at three different features that we're going to be rolling out in the next 24 hours. That if you're an existing customer of DeliverPoint, hopefully you'll find these beneficial, and we'll be eager to get your feedback on those as well. So if you've got any questions or just feedback that you want to share during the webinar, please feel free to do that. You can use the chat pane or the Q&A pane, and I'll address some of those questions and feedback when we get towards the end of the webinar as well. Okay, so first of all, let's just explore some of the different challenges that people face when they're using SharePoint. And also, you may have some challenges yourself that I've not mentioned. So again, feel free to pop those into the chat or into the Q&A. It'd be great to learn some of the experiences that you have when you're using SharePoint to manage permissions. But some of these we tend to find most organizations, it doesn't matter how large or how small, what sector you're in, some of these different challenges are faced by the majority of our customers, and of course vary a little bit based on how you go about assigning permissions, but most of them are the same. So first of all, we're going to just talk about this first one here. Permission reporting is limited to a single file or a folder at a time. This actually leads to many of the other problems when we're trying to report and manage permissions. When we're a site owner, whether we're a site collection administrator, it doesn't matter. When we go into a site, it could be just a single site, and inside a document library or inside a list, we're going to have lots of content. And as soon as we provision that site, we set the permissions up that we want to have in place, we then start creating content that could lead into hundreds or thousands of files and folders, and people start sharing them. Permission inheritance gets broken as we're assigning different direct permissions to different groups and to different individuals, and that becomes almost impossible, not just time consuming, but almost impossible to manage, based on the fact that we cannot, using SharePoint out of the box, report on more than one file or folder at a time. So the user interface just doesn't allow that. We can manage the access on one folder, but then we'd have to go into each subfolder or each file in order to be able to bring up the permission report. And the same thing applies to sharing links as well. So we can share either with anyone or create a sharing link for anyone. We can also share with specific people inside or outside of the organization, depending on the settings. And this again becomes a challenge because we don't really have the time to see what has been shared and by who when we're exploring the entire site. Again, depending on how you go about assigning permissions, some people just assign permissions through the SharePoint groups, other people use Microsoft 365 groups. What can sometimes be easier is to use Active Directory security groups to assign permissions. That way, when somebody maybe leaves the organization or changes roles, we can just effectively change their permissions at the security group level, and that doesn't, of course, just have an effect on SharePoint, but also has an effect on other systems in our organization as well. However, SharePoint doesn't offer any visibility as to who is appearing inside those Active Directory security groups. It doesn't enumerate them. So the challenge for a site owner is the fact that they're producing the permission report, and they may see that an Active Directory security group is permissioned, but they don't understand who's a member of it. Is the Active Directory administrator doing their job and taking the people out of the groups? Is there the possibility of an accidental group membership and so on, leading to incorrect permissions? So when you're owning something like that, that can be quite a challenge if you don't have that visibility. It's also time consuming to assign and remove permissions as personnel changes occur. So if somebody was to join our department, it's not just a case of assigning them permissions to the site itself or giving them permissions to a group. There could be files and folders within inside that site that they also need permissions to, and therefore we need to, of course, go through, identify them, and assign permissions or remove the permissions as those changes occur. And when you're again performing the changes, not just reporting, but when you're performing changes on a file by file basis or a folder by folder basis, again, that becomes almost an impossibility to manage. And it isn't seamless because we keep on getting requests. Can I have access to this folder and this file, and so on? So that becomes an ongoing overhead, which is difficult to again manage. Also, from the perspective of a site collection administrator, you may be a site collection administrator for several different site collections, or even a SharePoint administrator, and one of the challenges here is we don't really have a sort of overview of where the permission inheritance is broken or where the permission inheritance is still set to inherit. So that is a challenge because we can simply be going through the different steps to report on permissions purely to, first of all, understand whether it inherits permissions or not. And of course, if it is inheriting permissions, we can just move on to the next object, but that's going to be extremely time consuming trying to go through each file and each folder. There's also no focus on an individual. So if there is somebody that is leaving the organization, the simplest and most effective way of stopping them from having access to anything is to disable their Active Directory account, or disabling, or either disabling or deleting their Active Directory account, which of course stops them from authenticating. But one of the challenges there is that they're still going to be showing up inside of permission reports forever until we decide to take the step to clean those users up. So ideally, when somebody is going to be leaving the organization, we'll be able to find all the different places that they are permissioned, all the groups that they're a member of, so we can clean them up effectively and then go and disable that account. Otherwise, questions are going to be asked in the future about why is this person still permissioned when they perhaps left the organization some time ago. There's also no restore point for permissions either. So we can create the permissions on a particular team or a particular SharePoint site as we want them, as they're intended on day one of creating that site. And of course, as changes start to occur, they can become a bit of a mess. So it would be great if we could say, well, let's actually go back to the start. We'll reset it to this point in time where the permissions were in place as we intend them to be. And there's also no ability to clone permissions between files, folders, or sites. So what I mean by cloning the permissions, again, we're sort of getting towards the end of the year here. Let's just assume that in our finance site, we've got a document library called Invoices 2023, and we decide to create another document library ahead of next year called Invoices 2024. This is not some sort of sub library like we have a sub site. They're siblings, so it's impossible for the 2024 document to inherit permissions from the 2023 document. So what we've got, or library. So what we've got the ability to do with DeliverPoint is to be able to say, I want to clone the entire permission set from this particular library across to that library, which makes things a lot easier. And we can do that at different files and folders as well. So let's have a look at these challenges, just that we're on the same page as to what DeliverPoint is going to resolve for us. So I'm going to first of all start from the sort of end user perspective. So we're going into a modern SharePoint site from the perspective of a site owner. And even as the site owner, despite being able to pull up the site permissions or see the members, it's very difficult to get an accurate report as to who is actually permissioned against the site, but also against the content within this site as well. And of course, that's going to be one of your key responsibilities as the person that owns the site. So one thing that's misleading is that the members up in the top right hand corner here. So it is kind of accurate in what it's saying, but it can elude people to think that there's only 6 people with permissions. And if we don't know any better, when we click onto that, it could be assumed that these are the only people that actually have any form of permission to the site. So that would be an incorrect statement. But yeah, certainly these people are permissioned. But if we start to dive in a little bit deeper, we can click onto the site permissions using SharePoint. Out of the box reporting, we'll be able to see the 3 default groups that we get, which is the owners, the members, and the visitors groups. We can begin to expand those, and what we basically get to see is that there's some subgroups in here where we've got the Microsoft 365 group, which does get enumerated. So this is showing there's 7 members inside that group. So we can see the avatars for these people as well. You can click onto show more members and start to see those people, and you can search for those people and so on. But if we also go back there, you'll notice that we've got the everyone group. So that literally is everyone inside the organization. Bar external users has read permissions. And then, of course, we may have people with full control as well. Now, what this isn't telling us is, are there any direct permissions? It's showing me the members of these groups. But if we were to take another step and look at the advanced permission settings, we actually see a few users that haven't yet been mentioned. We've got demo user 23 and demo user 5 and 6 and 8, and these have all been granted permissions directly to the site. There's also people that may have been permissioned to different files and folders in the site that then end up getting web-only limited access to the site as well, and they've not been reported as yet either. If we were to go into some of these different SharePoint groups, we will be able to see that at that level, the Microsoft 365 groups are reported, and also the Active Directory security groups are reported as well, but we don't get to see who's actually in them. So we have to try, as a site owner, somebody that's not technical, necessarily, to jigsaw all these pieces together to try to determine who actually might have access to my site. And it's almost an impossibility when we're talking about hundreds of users and not just tens of users, as you're seeing in my environment here. So we've mentioned a couple of challenges there. One is the reporting, the lack of enumeration on the Active Directory security groups. What about the content within the site? So if we have a look at the documents, again, there's just a handful of documents here compared to what we're going to really see in production. But when we start to report on these, you'll notice that, yeah, quite simply, we can click on the ellipsis against each folder or against each file and choose the Manage Access option using SharePoint. That will tell us people and groups that are permissioned. Again, it's not enumerating any of the AD security groups or anything like that. It will also tell us if there's any sharing links on there as well. But that is only on the folder that I had selected. It's not even including any subfolders. So if I was to go into the commission sheets folder, we've got 5 subfolders in here where I have to go and repeat those actions on each of those different subfolders, and of course any of the files that appear inside those subfolders, and so on. So it's almost impossible, again, to even build up a picture as to what sharing links exist amongst all these files and folders just in one document library, let alone multiple document libraries and also subsites as well. So that's another challenge, is pulling up the sharing links and being able to manage these objects in bulk. Another thing, just looking at this, is there's no way of, again, telling which of these inherit permissions or which ones have unique permissions unless we pull up that manage access report, and then we can start to understand that information. So now we've got a sort of understanding of the challenges that people face. What we're going to do is have a look at DeliverPoint and how that can help you. So DeliverPoint is actually a product that is nested inside of the SharePoint user experience. That is, whether you're a site owner or just somebody with full control to a site or to a library or even to a folder inside a site as well. Or it may be that you're also a SharePoint administrator and you're centrally managing permissions. So we're taking care of that centralized and also decentralized permissions management structure that you may have inside your organization. You tend to find that, of course, in larger organizations, this has to be decentralized. We have to have site collection administrators and so on, and that control is taken outside of IT. In some smaller organizations, you tend to find that there's sometimes a couple of individuals that are managing permissions for the entire organization. And the reason why that's an impossibility as a company scales is it's of course, difficult for IT to actually know whether people should have permissions or not to certain content. They have the ability to assign permissions and to remove permissions, but it's whether they should, which becomes the challenge. And that reason is, or for that reason, permissions is often decentralized, and we have people that may be managers of departments also managing permissions. So we're able to cater for both those audiences. From a site owner perspective or somebody with full control, when you're in the context of the site or the team within inside of Teams, you can access DeliverPoint throughout the user experience. You'll notice here with 2 folders selected from that very same document library that we were just looking at, there's 3 different menu options here showing up, which are DeliverPoint. So we've got the DeliverPoint main user interface. We've also got the discover permissions, which is one of the reports, one of the more common reports, and then we've also got sharing links as well, which is a useful report. Notice the manage access is not displayed, and that's because I've got 2 folders selected, not 1 folder selected, so that disappears. SharePoint doesn't allow you, as I mentioned, to report across multiple folders, whereas DeliverPoint does. And what we can also do from the perspective of the site owner is to also make changes to permissions, not just with a sort of 2-step strategy of assigning permissions or removing permissions, but taking care of those scenarios such as somebody's leaving our department and there's not just one object, but there's hundreds or thousands of objects that somebody else needs those permissions to continue doing that job. So what we can have is the ability that somebody leaves the organization and we can simply say, within the scope of this site and maybe even its subsites, we want to transfer whatever permissions this person had over to another user that is going to inherit that same role and therefore requires these permissions to be able to operate. So you've got that as a transfer operation. There's also a copy operation as well. So if somebody was to join a department, we can say we want the same permissions as Brett has for this person that's going to be working alongside Brett and doing effectively the same role. So we've got that within the context of the sites. And then we've also got the main DeliverPoint page as well that allows us to centrally manage the permissions via a tree view. So we can select several different scopes at the same time. We could have multiple sites selected, multiple lists selected, or even multiple site collections if it's a sort of larger environment. We could go through and select those and then also produce the permission reports or make permission changes as needed that way. And then the product also extends to Teams, as I mentioned. So when you're in Teams, we face the same sort of challenges because, of course, Teams is, from the collaboration perspective, SharePoint. So every single team has an underlying SharePoint site. So when we assign people to different teams and then they're to leave the organization or again change roles, it's difficult to determine, well, which teams were they a member of? who's going to replace them, how do we replace them, and that's just focused on the team itself. You've of course got that same problem with the files and the folders that are inside that files tab as well to take care of, and also the sharing links. So we can do all of that in the context of Microsoft Teams as well. So let's get into the demo. Let's have a look at some of these features that I've mentioned. So I'm just going to go back to the home page of the same site, and notice again in the top right corner it says 6 members. We saw under the site permissions tab the groups here where we're having to dive in deeper. So what we'll do is just compare that with a discover permissions report. So in the top right hand corner here is some of the more common reports that you might want to access when you're using DeliverPoint. If you are not a site owner or you don't have full control to this site, you will not see these options. So it's completely security trimmed. It's just like SharePoint out the box in terms of if we see site permissions, then we must have full control and the ability to enumerate those permissions within inside the site. So I'm going to hit the discover permissions. So it's just a single click away. And when we produce that, you'll notice that unlike SharePoint, where we're starting off with the groups and having to drill down, we actually start off with the individuals, which is a bit more meaningful to somebody that is a site owner or a department manager. They will recognize individuals and whether these individuals should have permissions or not. If you don't recognize them by name, then what you can do is hover over any of the avatars. That will give you some further information through the people card, so we'll be able to see who that person reports to, what their email address is, and any other things that make up their profile. We'll also be able to see the permissions that each of these people have. So you'll notice that some people here have full control, others have read. As we navigate through this, you're going to see some people have the limited access or design or edit and so on. And then the fourth column here is showing how those permissions have arrived. So there's 2 users here, demo user 5 and 8. Those permissions have been assigned directly, so bypassing any groups. And then there's other users in here where permissions are assigned via Active Directory security groups. So you can see the sales AD security group being enumerated. We've got the limited access, which of course is permission because those users have been given permission to something else within inside the site. And you may also see permissions being granted through Microsoft 365 groups and so on as well. Also inside this report, you may see users like demo user 26 where they're appearing faded compared to other users. The reason for that is one of the instances of an account that has been deleted or disabled at the Active Directory level but is still permissioned on the site. So there's no security concern with that remaining there. It's just telling us that, this person doesn't exist anymore in the AD, but they are still permissioned on the site. So we could, of course, go through and remove them if we want to. We can remove them just from this single instance by using the account management delete permissions option, or there's also dead account reporting that we can do more centrally with inside of DeliverPoint as well, which we'll be getting to. There's also the question of guest accounts. So we saw a few just a moment ago. It's sometimes quite confusing where you'll see people with the same name appearing more than once. One of them may be in italics, one of them in a normal font with different avatars. And this is quite simply my Gmail account is the guest account. So the one in italics is a guest account. Any in the normal font is a local account to the tenant. So we can spot those as well and where they've been permissioned throughout our site. Of course, this is also filterable and sortable and so on as well. So if we, for example, know of all these people that have read permissions, so everybody is showing up in here because they've got read permissions. If we know that, we're okay with it. We want to focus on the other permissions. What we can do is come up here to the permission via, click onto filter, and there's different properties that we can filter on for that column. So we'll say not equal to everyone and save that. And now it's taken that everyone group out of the equation. It's reduced the size of my report dramatically, and I can focus on the other permissions in hand. What we can also do is switch this to render by groups. as opposed to rendering by user. So it's more like what you get out of the box with SharePoint, except for the fact that we can expand the members and see who the members of each of these groups are. So this is really focused on any direct assignments, whether it's a group or an individual. They will show up inside this report, and we could expand things like the sales members in here, either the Active Directory, the Microsoft 365 group or the SharePoint group. We can distinguish between those two. Notice here we can see the sales AD security group is nested, so we could then go and have a look at who's inside that sales AD security group and spot things like this as well. So even at the AD level, there's subgroups, which we had no idea of when we used SharePoint to report on the permissions. So we can actually also enumerate that subgroup as well. So that's the Discover permissions. You'll note that we can also export that out to Excel. We can also save it as a template. So once we've put our filters and sort criteria in place, we could save it as a template so it can be easily run again on demand in the future. But what I'm going to show you next is how we can also go into a document library, see the different files and the different folders that make up that document library, and report across those as well. So again, just to point out, manage access is here because I've got one folder selected. Choose two folders, manage access disappears, but we still have DeliverPoint here on that submenu. So I could choose multiple files and folders at that level, discover the permissions, which is the same report that we just saw. And what you'll notice is it spans each of those different folders. So now we've got the power of some great reporting, such as the ability to focus in on an individual. So if I focus on myself here, I'm seeing what permissions I have across those four folders, which is quite a common thing to do. We're making sure that this person can do their job, has the right access that they need to those four folders, perhaps. And what you'll also notice on the left-hand side, where we've got the folder name, sometimes that folder name is in a clear blue font, sometimes it's dimmed, and the reason for it being dimmed is because that folder inherits permissions as opposed to having unique permissions. So now we can start to focus on the folders with the unique permissions and making sure that they're correct. Of course, the inherited permissions are going to be the same as the library or the site that we're within. So that's the permission reporting at that level. There's also the challenge of subfolders that we mentioned. So commission sheets has multiple subfolders. Each of those subfolders has subfolders and files and so on. So what we can do is bring up the main DeliverPoint page here. And from the reports menu, if I perform a advanced discover permissions report, I can check the option to also include folders and items within this folder with unique permissions. So as the scope is set to the folder that I selected, but now we're diving in deeper to actually have a look at the subfolders as well. And I can also include the folder structure for navigation purposes with that too. So when we generate that, we're not just seeing the commission sheets folder that I selected, but as we scroll through this report, notice how we're also seeing those subfolders and who's got permissions to each of those. And of course, that extends to the files as well that are going to be appearing inside those subfolders. Okay, so that's the direct permissions taken care of. We can also take a look at sharing links. So again, the way to check for sharing links is to use that same manage access menu. So we know that that's only going to give us the ability to report one file or folder at a time. So what I'm going to do is actually span the entire site using DeliverPoint here, and we'll run a sharing links report off that menu. So this is scanning the entire site here, and it's found all the sharing links that exist inside this site. So at the top, we've got the lists that have a sharing link, and then I've also got items that have a sharing link as well. So we can determine when they were shared, who they were shared by, the sharing type. So was it an anyone link? Was it certain people in the organization or specific people outside of the organization? What permission they have, and also who the members are. So anyone links are not going to enumerate members because they're an anyone link. But if we've got specific people, we'll be able to see who those specific people are. And if we want to make changes to that, because we know that a certain supplier who's no longer employed with that organization or something along those lines, we can go through and change those settings. So I could just drop demo user 11, for example, from the sharing link and save that, and they disappear there in real time. We could also delete the entire sharing link if we want to. We can, with anyone links, also set them to expire. So sometimes it's useful to have an anyone link. I do it all the time on maybe logos or things like that I want certain people to have, but maybe we don't want that to be indefinitely. So what we can do is just simply go through and set an expiry date and save that, and then those permissions will be automatically removed once that expiry date arises. Okay, so that's the sharing links at the site level, and of course you could be more specific with that. If there was certain files or folders that you just want to investigate, you're not necessarily wanting to span the entire site, well, that's possible too. You can just simply access the sharing links directly off the submenu here and report on those. So out of those 4 folders that I selected, there's just a single sharing link set on sales brochures. Okay, just another report that we're going to take a look at from the context of the site is the permissions summary. And the permissions summary is a great one to take a look at if you just want a high level view as to what's going on inside this site is in terms of permissions. So when I generate this report, we get that high level view. We can see how many items have sharing links, how many items have unique permissions, how many lists have unique permissions, and how many subsites have unique permissions. And then we've also got the scopes with the most unique objects or the scopes with the most sharing links as well. So we can start to focus our efforts on a certain document library that happens to contain a lot of sharing links and a lot of broken permission inheritance and so on. So the icon next to each of these is a hyperlink. So of course the next question is, when we see a total of 17 items, well, what are those items? So we can drill into that, and that will open up a new tab for me, and now I can see each of those different folders of files that do have unique permissions. And when we're looking at this, we may have a look at things like the commission sheets in here. Since they do have unique permissions, we could have those all selected, and we might run a discover permissions. And this is great because we'll, of course, see who's got permissions to each of those folders. But when we're looking at hundreds or thousands of users, that's going to be challenging to actually try to determine why it might have unique permissions. So what we can also do is compare them. So I'm going to include the site this time, as well as the 4 folders. And from the reports menu, we can hit compare permissions, and that will actually tell me what the differences are between the site and those subfolders. So actually, we're not seeing any differences between the folders themselves, but there's just additional people permissioned at the site level, which tells me I may as well just re-inherit the permissions perhaps on those subfolders, which I could also do from here. So with these selected, we can just simply go to the actions menu, and under permissions management, we could inherit those permissions at that level. Okay, so that's the permission summary. We could also get into the sharing links from there. We can also see each of these different levels, the detail as and when we want to. All right, so what we're going to do next is move into the main DeliverPoint page. So this is great for some additional reports on the current site. So you'll notice that the scope still remains on Lightning Tools Sales, which is the site that I was in. But what we can also do from here is show the tree view and then change that scope. So instead of just being this one site, what I could do is maybe expand this site collection that I'm currently within and select other sites within that site collection, and maybe also some lists and libraries that I can tell, looking at the tree view, have unique permissions. So we can go through and select those. Those all become the scope. So now we can produce a report on each of those objects that I selected, whether they're a site or a list or a library, and we get all of that inside our permission report. A step that's sometimes easier as well, and also includes documents, is to run a advanced discover permissions report. And what we can do in here is include anything that happens to have unique permissions. So when we run this one, without having to select anything, it's actually gone through and identified who's permissioned on each of the different sites inside this site collection that have unique permissions, who's permissioned on each of the lists or libraries with unique permissions, and who's permissioned on each of the folders or files that also have unique permissions. So we get all of that inside that one report. Now, if this is something that you want to run time and time again and keep an eye on, we could save that as a template. And I'm just going to give this template a name of webinar 2. I'm going to make it shared, which means that other people with full control can also access this report. And what we'll do is just close DeliverPoint just to pretend we're sort of coming into it for the first time today. And now all I have to do is go into the report templates, pick my favorite report. There's webinar 2, generate that. And the report, as I left it within the template or as I saved it, has all the properties. So it's reporting on the same things that were included before. And if you want to, you can also get back to the properties of that template. So if there's anything that you want to refine in here, you can also go through and refine it, such as showing sensitivity labels for files as well. That's something that you could do. So if you're marking things as confidential or anything like that, you can include that label in the report. You can also add additional scopes as well. So we could add other site collections. We could also clone this report and assign it to a different site collection, and so on from within there. So there's other reports as well that we can access. So you'll notice there's a permission summary that we could access from here. We've also got the my owned site collections, which is a great one. When I trigger this report, I'm running it from the context of me as the currently signed in user. So it's going through quite a lot, as you can see, of site collections at the moment. It's trawling through 231 site collections, processing also a lot of groups within inside those site collections as well, to determine which ones I'm the owner of. So that will have finished hopefully in just a few seconds. There we go. So now in one place, I can see all the site collections that I own, and I can start to manage them from in here. So you can see the icon is telling me whether it's a shared channel, which is a new feature. We've also got teams, we've got hub sites, we've got Microsoft 365 groups and so on. But what they've got all in common is the fact that I'm the owner of them. So that's something that I can do from here in order to be able to start managing them. So I can report on site collections and so on that I own and produce those reports. But what I can also do from the tree view is select this accounts view, and what I might want to do is report on somebody else if I have the rights to do so. So what I can do is produce the permission report for Sandy, but I'm going to have a look at the site collections that she owns. And there's all her site collections. So let's just suppose for a moment, and this isn't the case, I'm not going to start a rumor, but let's just say that Sandy's going to leave the organization or something like that. I can simply go through, select some of those site collections and transfer the ownership, so we're not ending up with orphaned site collections should that occur. So we've got that ability to do that. And equally, we can have a look at Sandy's sharing links that she's created from within OneDrive. So we've got that ability. We can also remove those sharing links if we want to, or set those to expire. And we've also got the OneDrive direct permissions for Sandy as well. So we can see any permissions that she's given. And of course, this is again useful information should anything change, because people are relying on these links to do their jobs perhaps. So now we could perhaps move those files or folders before potentially removing the OneDrive. So we've also got, since we're running in the context of Sandy, unique permissions. This is probably not going to tell me too much about Sandy in this site collection. Yeah, we've got some limited information other than she's a site collection admin and what groups she's in. So let's just switch back to myself. And I'll run the unique permissions report on me. And what you'll notice is that I can see which groups I'm in, either directly or indirectly. So we've got the group name on the left, the scope of that group, and then the member account is how I'm a member of the group. So sometimes it's direct, sometimes it may be through an AD security group. We've also got site collections and site collection administrators. Oh, I've got 2 accounts selected here, sorry. We've also got unique site permissions, list permissions, and item permissions as well. So from here, we can make changes as well. So we could see that maybe there's a certain document in here that I shouldn't have full control to. So we can simply come down to the account management, and this is where we've got those operations such as transferring permissions, deleting permissions, copying the permissions, etc. And you'll find that we can do that in almost every report. So we'll demonstrate some of these actions. I'm just going to jump back to the tenant view here, and let's just report on a single site so it's not too overwhelming. So we've got the Discover permissions running on the Lightning Tools sales site, and so you can see things more clearly, let's pick on some of these direct permissions. So demo user 23 has contribute permissions. Let's suppose that demo user 23 is leaving and being replaced. So what we can do is come down to account management, transfer those permissions. So we're transferring from demo user 23, and I'll transfer to demo user 22. And in here, we don't just get to affect the site that we're on, but we could also affect any subsites. We could affect any lists or folders or items. So this will affect those where demo user 23 is permissioned and demo user 22 is not permissioned, and the objects have unique permissions. We can also roll back, or have the ability to roll back this change. And then we can also include whether or not we want to make changes to the group memberships as well, or just affect the direct permissions. So when we run that, you'll notice that it will go through and start making some changes. So it's transfer permissions on maybe a dozen objects. And if we just jump back to our Discover permissions report, I will refresh the report and notice it's now demo user 22 that has the contribute and not demo user 23. Should we have just caused mayhem and demo user 23 is now panicking because they can't do their job and this was a mistake, what we can do is go to the jobs view at any point, and there's the transfer permissions job that I created. We can see when it was created and who by, and I can roll that back, and that will reverse the job for me. So again, we'll go back to our Discover permissions and watch this change from demo user 22 back to demo user 23. So it's been undone and reversed back to how we intended it to be. Okay, so that's one of the operations that we can perform. That was the transfer, but there's also a copy. The main difference being that the source account retains their permissions in the copy versus the transfer where the source account loses their permissions. And we've also got delete and grant and revoke permissions as well that we can perform. So granting permissions, this is useful to do on any site, but one place where it's particularly useful is when we're looking at the hub site view. So if you are using hub sites and associated sites, one of the challenges with that is every single associated site has its own unique permissions. So assigning permissions to every single associated site means we need to know where to navigate and do it one at a time. Whereas with DeliverPoint, I can select all of those associated sites and simply come down to the grant permissions and do that in one go. That could be via a group, or we could also assign permissions directly as well in here if we want to. Okay, so that's covered a lot of the different permission options. There's also the ability to schedule these reports as well. One of the new features of this version is the fact that there's more scheduled reports available. We did just have discover permissions and sharing links, but the benefit of this, I could go and grab the URL here to a document library and make that document library the repository for any scheduled permission reports. So this is a benefit for two reasons. One is we want to have maybe the ability to audit permissions. We could create this centrally in IT for site owners to go and review and mark the fact that they have reviewed the permissions. But it can also be useful in larger scopes where there's just hundreds of thousands of files or folders, and the report's going to take a considerable amount of time in order to be able to execute. So rather than just watching this run potentially for hours, what we could do is schedule it, and that puts the load onto Azure, which will do this job for us, and the document will be created with all those permissions for us to go through and review then. So we can choose the frequency of how often we want this to run, and the intervals that it's going to run on, and then we've also got those same sort of options that we have when we're also setting up the scopes of the advanced discover permissions. And also to point out before we get into the new features that DeliverPoint can also be accessed via Teams. So if I just go into the Teams view, again, I've got all my teams in here, and we can choose the add member or the manage team for each team, but you can't do that on more than one team at a time. So when you've got hundreds or thousands of teams and you need to strip somebody out or add somebody in, that again can be time consuming. So using DeliverPoint in the context of teams is really useful. We can just simply access DeliverPoint on the side menu here as a personal app. We can choose each of the different teams that we want to affect. We can search on the ones that are important to us. So if I expand this technical support team, for example, you'll notice in here that we've got the technical support private channel, there's technical support shared channel. We've also got the general channel as well. So I can select all of those and then report on them to see who's permissioned on each of those too. Okay, so let's have a look at what is new in this version. So we're looking at 4.3, and there's three main features of this version of DeliverPoint, which will be made available to you today. So you'll be able to come in and download that. There's the ability to record and restore snapshots. So this means that once we've created a site, we've put the permissions in place that we intend them to be, but then they change because people are sharing files and sharing folders, or there's new permissions added onto different files and folders or lists or libraries, there's permission inheritance being broken, and so on and so forth. We can take a snapshot at the point where we get it right as we want it, and then if we start to see this permissions mess occurring, what we can do is go through and restore that snapshot, or even compare the snapshot with the current state before we restore it as well, so we can actually make a more informed decision as to whether we're going to restore or not, or maybe take a new snapshot. There's the additional scheduled reports that I also mentioned, so we'll take a look at some of those, and then we've also got the Teams shared channel reporting as well, which is a new feature of DeliverPoint. So taking a look at the snapshots, if we go into DeliverPoint here, I'm going to trigger a discover permissions on this sales site, so we get to see that the permissions that are currently set. And from the actions menu under snapshot management, notice I can take a snapshot of those permissions. I don't just have to do it for this one site and each file or a folder at a time, because we already know how frustrating that can be. So what we can do is actually run things like a discover permissions advanced, maybe include everything with unique permissions, generate that, and we can take a snapshot of all of that in one go. So again, from the actions menu, we can come down to the snapshot management, take a snapshot. So we can give that a name. So I'm just going to call this webinar snapshot. And I like to give these a date, so we know when the snapshot was taken. I can make it shared, so other people again can access it if they have full control. And there's also the ability to include subsites, lists, and folders and items as well. So once I take that snapshot, that is now recorded. So we've got the snapshot there ready to go. And what I'm going to do here is just make some changes. So on my permissions here on the site, let's just make some changes to these direct permissions somewhere. We'll just filter here on demo user 23, which we know has unique permissions, and let's remove that. So we'll choose the actions and then delete permissions. So those are deleted, as well as some of the lists and libraries as well. And what we'll also do is go through and assign some permissions. And we'll do something a bit crazy. Let's just go through and choose every single permission in here. I'll process some subsites as well. And just incidentally, notice there is the checkbox, which I didn't check, to say notify users via email. In this case, where there's all of these permissions being granted, you're not going to get an email for every single one of those. It's one nice summary email about all the permissions that have just been granted to you with hyperlinks to each of those different objects as well. So from the snapshot, we can recover permissions. And there's my my webinar snapshot. So if I select that and say compare permissions, it will show me what the differences are between now and when the snapshot was taken. So you can see here, demos 23 was removed, and demos 24 gained the contribute, design, edit, full control, read, and review. So if I decide that that's fine, I'll keep those, that's all good. I might want to take another snapshot, or what I could do is hit recover permissions, and that will replace the permissions as per the snapshot that I took. Okay, so fantastic new feature. Hopefully going to save a considerable amount of time in restoring those permissions. In terms of the scheduled reports, as I mentioned, we've got more available. So you'll see, as well as discover permissions and sharing links, we've also got unique objects and unique permissions. If I was to select a site collection, we've also got some additional reports showing up in here as well, such as unlicensed users and external users, the unique permissions report, and also dead accounts as well. So running those in real time, because we didn't really have a look at those, if I run the dead account report, you'll be able to see users with that are dead accounts, and we can go through and remove those dead accounts from here. But if we are wanting to run this across perhaps multiple site collections, and those contain thousands of subsites and other objects and so on, we could decide that actually let's schedule it. So we could hit the dead account, sorry, schedule from menu. So hit schedule. I could again put in the list or library where I want these to go, the frequency, and then schedule it. And then once that's been produced, we can come back to that scheduled reports menu, see the dead account report. So once it's done, I'm going to have a hyperlink here in order to be able to open up that report. We'll be able to review it and make any changes that we want to. And the most important thing here is I don't have to wait for it to be produced. It will just be done in its own time, and then I can come in and of course access that. So that's the scheduling, and then just the final point of a new feature was that shared channel. So when you're in Teams now, and I say now, this is a feature that was introduced about a year ago. When you add a channel in Teams, you can create, of course, a private channel, which is typically a smaller subset of people that have access to the general channels, or we can also now create a shared channel. So the shared channel solves that problem of people having to switch tenants and so on when they're using the Teams desktop. So this means that any shared channels will actually appear in guest account's own instance of Teams, sharing it with their tenant, if you like, so they can access it. So those show up with a slightly different icon when they're in Teams, and we also produce that same thing in DeliverPoint. So we'll be able to identify any shared channels from within Teams, or also from within inside of SharePoint as well. So if we just do a search on technical support, I know we already saw this, but if we expand that, notice the shared channel in here as well as my private channel. So we could go through and select those, and again, discover permissions or change the permissions if we want to. All right, so those are the new features, and that will be made available to you very shortly. I'm going to open up for any questions that anybody may have. So I see that there has been some questions whilst I've been chatting away, and I think Sandy, my colleague, has been doing a great job of answering those. So I'm just going to have a quick scan through to see if there's any unanswered ones. I'll do my best to check them here. If you do have any other questions, feel free to post those in the chat window. Happy to read them out and answer them. Or you can also reach out to me through my email address, brett@lightningtools.com, or of course through our support, which is help@lightningtools.com as well. So great question here. Can you remove yourself as a site collection administrator from the application, or do you have to go back into the admin center to be able to do that? So we offer a transfer as the site collection admin. That would replace it as part of that operation. I'd need the permissions in order to be able to make that change. But yes, effectively, I could transfer permissions from me to somebody else as the site collection owner at that level. I would have the rights to do that as a site collection administrator when I trigger it. Can we give access to DeliverPoint reports to users who are not owners, do not have full control permission level, at least at document, library, or folder level? You cannot. So there's no way of actually overcoming the security trimming that's already in place with SharePoint. So you would need at least the enumerate permissions and the manage permissions roles, which appear under full control, in order to be able to make permission changes or enumerate permissions. So those would be a requirement for you to make permission changes, even with DeliverPoint. And again, if you just a sub point, if you were just typical member or somebody with contribute permissions to the site, you didn't have that full control, you wouldn't actually see the DeliverPoint menu items. Also a related question, you might have on the tree view full control to a site, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have full control to everything in that site either, which if I was to say I want to copy permissions at the site level and affect everything inside that site, when it produces the log, you may actually see certain items where DeliverPoint will say, I couldn't change permissions on this because you don't have sufficient access to do so. So the folder or the file is in scope for the operation, but then does not get affected because you didn't have permissions for that change to take place. I think. Oh, I see Sandy did answer that. Sorry. So yeah, I think most of these have. It won't be any harm for me reading these out anyway. But yeah, can the snapshots be scheduled? Not at this time. Great suggestion. And we are currently designing our roadmap for 2024. So yeah, something that we could consider. as well as any other feature suggestions that you might have. Okay, sorry, just trying to spot which ones haven't been answered. So question here, we have some cases where we grant permissions to security groups instead of Microsoft 365 groups. Is it possible to see which are members of security group identified in DeliverPoint by clicking on the group name? Yep, absolutely. So if we just jump here into SharePoint, any of the reports allow us to see the AD security groups in here. And if you render by groups, then you get to see the members of an AD security group. If you want to, from this report, you can also focus in from here. I could say I want to filter on this and have a look at everybody permissioned via that AD security group at that level. So great question here. If a user leaves the organization then returns, could a snapshot be used to reapply the permissions? Yes, as long as the AD account has not been deleted. So if the AD account has been deleted, then that would be a different identity. But yes, as long as that's not the case, then that could be the case. Great question. It is difficult to spot those questions that Sandy hasn't answered. So I'm just going to allow the mic on Sandy, actually, if I'm able to.
I think I got all of them. Yeah, the ones that you answered out loud are the ones that I had not answered. I've stopped answering, so you can.
Okay, fantastic. Great, Sandy. Thank you. All right, so we should be good. I don't see any more fresh questions. But like I say, if there is any questions that do come up, please feel free to reach out, and we'll be happy to answer anything that you have for us. All right. So yeah, thank you very much, everybody, for attending this webinar. I hope it was useful to you. Again, we welcome any feedback, so please let us know. And yeah, hopefully see you on the next webinar. Take care. Bye-bye.